In this video, I'm going to talk about emotional resilience. Emotions in general is a subject that is very close to my heart. I'm very passionate about it because emotions have been a huge part of my journey in personal and spiritual growth. And if you're a human being watching this, you can probably relate. So I want to begin with talking about why it is important to build emotional resilience. And really to get there, I first have to talk about something that is happening in our culture and our modern society today. So as you may know and may experience yourself, a lot of our modern society is driven by convenience, by comfort. And this is not necessarily bad or wrong, but what is happening with that is that we, in some ways, are expecting to have that internal experience as well. What I mean by this is that a lot of times we somewhat ignore the fact that our human experience involves suffering and discomfort. Although we experience this on a daily basis with different situations and scenarios that are presented, there is something inside of us, almost like an expectation that this shouldn't be happening, that we shouldn't be having this experience, this discomfort, this pain, or any other similar emotion. And what this is bringing is a lot of frustration because we want to change the situation. We want to avoid feeling that discomfort. We want to escape feeling those really emotional experiences. And specifically when it comes to feeling these emotions in the body, we are not used to this. And a lot of times we don't know how to contain this. We don't know how to navigate it. And this is the reason why in so many ways we are trying to escape that experience of feeling these heavy emotions. A lot of times we find comfort in food and substances and maybe even taking it out against or towards something or someone because the sensation itself in the body is so uncomfortable and so unfamiliar that we want to move away from that. We want to remove that experience out of our sensations and out of our awareness. Of course, the fact that our modern society is leaning towards finding more ways to find convenience and comfort is not the only reason why we are so disconnected from our emotions. There are many different layers to that subject. But I think that it is more tangible when I think about it in this way. But when I think about the fact that in general, all of us are going through the same thing, I feel less separate, less different versus thinking, oh, maybe it was me who didn't get this from my parents, from my family, from my school. So it helps me to see this more as a bigger kind of like systematic issue so that I don't feel so alone in this recognition that maybe I'm not so familiar with my emotions and maybe I'm not sure how to handle them. So this is the reason why I like to go in that direction. But of course, I am not trying to say that this is the only reason why we are not so familiar and not so connected with our emotions. There are many different layers and every single one of us is going to experience that totally different. However, the reason why I want to record this video and talk about this is because it is very apparent, very common to have conversations in my family, with my friends, with people that I meet, in which it becomes very evident that we are so unfamiliar with what our emotions are, that we are looking in other places in different ways to give some type of reasoning to the things that are happening to us. So in some ways, it is easier to look outside versus looking within and really getting to understand what is happening internally. And most of the times, that comes with the connection, the recognition of our emotions. Now, why is it important to build emotional resilience? And I want to explain a little bit more about what I mean by emotional resilience. So I think that when I talk about resilience specifically when it comes to emotions, I'm really alluding to the willingness to be with my emotions, the capacity to hold my emotions hands and be with it and understand it and see it in the eye and make space for that emotion and try to understand what it is trying to tell me. So it is almost like the endurance that I can build to sit with an emotion and understand it at the deepest level possible. And when I say understanding it, I don't only mean understanding it at the intellectual level. I really mean sitting with it and being with it. A lot of times I may not be able to gain any insight intellectually as far as like, what is this emotion telling me here? But if I have the capacity to sit with it and to recognize how it feels in my body, the different temperature, sensations, and textures that it comes with, I am showing the willingness that I have to just be with that. And that is a different level of understanding than just the intellectual level. So why is it important to build this emotional resilience, to cultivate it? So if we really think about it, a lot of our actions are driven by emotions. They're driven by whatever is arising for us. And when we find discomfort in those emotions, we may react in ways that are maybe not in alignment with what the feeling is truly showing us. We may react because we don't like the sensation in our bodies. We may react because we're not used to holding that emotion and that energy in our bodies. And when we react instead of respond, a lot of times that reaction is not so beneficial for us. It is more of a primal and survival mechanism than an actual strategic response based on our intentions, based on our goals or the love that we have towards someone or the connection that we want to create with something or someone, right? So when we're constantly in that survival kind of like fear response, we are not able to truly be our most authentic selves and really express our highest capacities. I find that a lot of the human experience and our lessons in this expression as human beings is being able to integrate our animal instincts and the highest capacity that we have to be beings of love and compassion and connection. My personal view and understanding of what I am doing here in this lifetime is to be able to love unconditionally, to get to connect with people and see them for who they are at the deepest level, at the heart level. It is to get past all of the wiring and the programming of our mammal bodies and actually being able to see through that and see past that and see the light that you carry within you. So when I am able to connect with my emotions, when I am able to get familiar with them, when I am able to hold them, I am overriding that animal instinct. I am overriding that primal response, that primal mechanism. And I am able to really fulfill this highest expression that I am capable of, that I have within me. And of course, at the more grounded level, when I have a specific goal, when I have a specific intention, and I am able to really keep that as my North Star instead of reacting to whatever I am not able to hold within me, then I am being responsible. I am taking responsibility and I'm honoring and I am really being consistent with that which I promised myself I was going to do. Emotions is a huge subject. There are so many things that I could talk about, but I am just going to touch on a couple different things here for this video, and maybe in the future I will just share more of my thoughts on this topic. So why do we really struggle with emotions? Like I mentioned before, there's so many different layers. Specifically, one that is easier for me, like I said, it is really thinking about the fact that we have almost like this unconscious agreement that everything that we are creating moving forward is so that we can be more efficient, so that we can find more convenience, more comfort, and so on. Which, of course, this is not intrinsically wrong, again. However, we have to be very aware with how that is impacting different areas of our lives. Now, of course, this is very generational, right? Our parents, or speaking about myself, my parents didn't necessarily have the tools to know how to handle their own emotions. And a lot of times our parents may have been embarrassed because we were, or I was, having an emotional response to something when I was a child. And maybe the response was like, don't cry right now, don't do this. For me specifically, don't cry was a huge one. So when we have been conditioned for so many years to not express our emotions, obviously we start to gain this unconscious belief that those emotions carry with them something wrong, and we're not supposed to express them. We're not supposed to even allow them to fully move through us. So having this understanding is important. However, I find that a lot of times when we understand that maybe we were not given the tools and the embrace that we needed, sometimes we can build some resentment towards those who took care of us. But really, I believe that most people, most parents had the best intentions and most of their actions were benevolent. Of course, unfortunately, this is not true for every single person in the planet, but for the most part, I believe that our parents really wanted the best out of us, and they did what they could with the tools that they had and the knowledge that they had. So yes, we may have been conditioned and programmed in a way that we were not able to fully express all of those beautiful and sometimes very difficult and heavy emotions. But as adults, this is something that we can really start to recognize that is important. We can start to take responsibility for everything that happens within us and how that is affecting our external environment. So the main reason why we struggle with emotions is because we simply do not have the knowledge and the tools and the capacity to be with them and to understand them. So it is very normal as human beings that when something is unfamiliar to us, we don't necessarily want to get closer to that. Instead, we find some fear about that. There's uncertainty when there is something that we don't know. And when we don't know how to handle it, we are awkward in many ways. And it is easier to kind of like give our backs to that. So I think it is important to know that if you are someone that as an adult, or if you're not an adult, if you're a teenager, if you're a child watching this, know that for the most part, every human being struggles with understanding their emotions. I know I have struggled. I know that I still struggle. I know that I will probably keep struggling because in a way, I think that emotions are one of those beautiful things that we have as human beings that is just as beautiful as it is difficult. And it is part of the human experience, part of the programming, because it is supposed to teach us so much in our journey as human beings. So to the moment that we will have our last breath in this lifetime, emotions are going to be masters in our human experience and how our soul wants to learn. So I find that it is important to understand a little bit what emotions are. And for this, I am going to use the framework of the interpersonal neurobiology understanding from Dr. Daniel Siegel's work. Dr. Daniel Siegel is a psychiatrist. He has 30 plus years of experience. And he's also the co-founder of the Mindfulness Research Institute in UCLA. So I absolutely love his work, and I have trained under his interpersonal neurobiology framework, which has been an amazing experience. I love the fact that Dr. Daniel Siegel, of course, is a doctor, and a lot of his views are science-based, right? So they come from understanding the brain from a science perspective. They come from understanding the mind, the relationships, so many different layers. However, when he speaks, I find that I am listening to a spiritual teacher and not so much like a scientist teacher, because he leaves so much room for curiosity, for just the nature of the creative expression of life. There's not one thing set in stone. Instead, there is ways to understand it. There's ways to explore it. And that's what this framework does. It really creates a lot of room to understand each other, to understand ourselves, to understand what reality is and what the human experience really is. So from the IPNB, the interpersonal neurobiology perspective, emotions are a shift in energy and information flow. So just to quickly understand that, emotions are basically energy and motion. And energy is not just air. Energy carries information within it. So emotions from this perspective is this energy that is shifting its flow based on, of course, many different things. It could be something that is happening outside of us, right, from our environment, or something that is happening within. And this takes me to understanding two different ways in which we process information. One of them is top down, and the other one is bottom up. And for this, I want to use an example that Dr. Daniel Siegel used to explain this. So say that there's a child that is crawling, on like in a house. And this child, a baby, comes across a cat. This baby doesn't have a concept of what a cat is. And it's the first time that they're seeing a cat. So when the baby sees a cat, there's going to be a response to this. There may be fear, or they may be awe. There is this creature that is in front of them. And as this baby is looking at this creature, there is information that is moving through the body because there was a sense of awe or fear that maybe was felt in the belly. And that information is actually flowing up to the brain, where the brain is going to make sense of this, right? So there is a flow of information that goes from the bottom, like literally anatomically from the bottom of the body towards the top of the body, towards the brain. And that is basically the understanding that we can sense things from our environment. There's external stimuli that is creating this expression and this reaction in the body that is sending signals towards the brain, and then the brain makes sense of that. Now, the top-down way of processing information is somewhat the opposite. It is the understanding that we have created some concepts and some symbols have meaning, right? So a chair is a symbol that we have given meaning to. So when I see a chair, like I have in front of me, I am processing information in my brain because all of those symbols are coming through my eyes, and my eyes are sending this information towards my brain, directly towards my brain. And I may or may not have a reaction to this, right? So I may find ease in knowing that that's a chair and it's not a tiger, right? If I saw a tiger, I will have a reaction to this symbol that I already know could harm me, right? So then that information is happening in my brain first, and then my body will have a reaction to that. Now, this top-down processing can also mean that when I carry with me so many different ideas, beliefs, and narratives that are in the shape or in the form of thoughts, right? Because beliefs are thoughts that we keep thinking. And when I have this constant rumination on these thoughts, then that can also create this flow of information towards, the lower areas of my body. So this is important when it comes to understanding emotions, because emotions have this characteristic of being bidirectional, which basically means that emotions could arise from external stimuli, and then those emotions create thoughts, or my thoughts could actually influence the way that my emotions are going to be felt, the way that energy is going to be moved. And this is incredibly important to understand when we are getting familiar with our emotions. The reason being is because as we get familiar with our emotions, we are going to understand that while holding space for our emotions and really getting familiar with them and allowing them to be and allowing them to inform whatever they need to inform us of, it is also very responsible. It is also important to understand when we could be possibly be creating an emotion or dwelling in an emotion that is created by our thought patterns. And for the most part, at least this was my experience, as I started to recognize my emotions, I started to understand that a lot of my emotions, especially the ones that were fear and anger and frustration, were not necessarily created by my external stimuli, but instead they were created because I sustained beliefs and thoughts that were constantly creating this sense of fear or this sense of frustration. So as we explore our emotions even deeper, we gain this ability to discern whether an emotion is here to be embraced and to be loved and to be acknowledged, or when an emotion is here to show us that there's a thought pattern, there is a belief that we're sustaining that is limiting our capacity to experience life from a different place. And perhaps we are the ones that are creating an experience and a situation in our lives that may not be necessary. Perhaps we are constantly feeling frustrated about something or someone, when really what is happening is that we are sustaining a thought, an expectation, a belief that keeps us stuck in a place where that emotion is constantly going to be informing us that there's something that we need to explore at the psychological level. So basically, as we start to navigate our emotions, as we start to sit with them, as we start to understand them, what is going to happen is that we are going to gain more insight into what the information of that energy flow is actually here to show us. So as our awareness expands, as we get familiar with our emotions, something could happen in which we feel more discomfort, right? So we may finally sit with our emotion and we get curious about it. Where do I feel it? How does it feel? Where in my body specifically I'm feeling the sensation of this emotion? And as we sit with it, things like images could come to us. Images of maybe memories of something, a specific situation, a conversation that we had that may have influenced this emotion, that may have created this emotion in the first place. Maybe we have thoughts, maybe we start to recognize an inner voice that is telling us something and that is creating this emotion. And this is the tricky part about doing this work, because as we start to get brave and courageous and sit with the emotions, the insights themselves are going to bring us an awareness that is going to need our responsibility and our care to understand what happened in the first place. A lot of times emotions are here to kind of like shake our reality a little bit, especially the ones that are created by our thoughts and beliefs and our expectations. They're here for us to really go deeper and understand where we could possibly be either sabotaging ourselves or limiting our capacity to experience life from a different perspective. The basis of our reality, the beliefs that we sustain, create the structure of the reality that we live in. personally, individually, right? Something is coming to me that I come across a lot. So I live in Florida. I live in South Florida and I live really close to Miami. There's something that I hear a lot when I come across people in Miami. I've been living here for 17 years. And there is something that I hear a lot when I meet people that have lived here for a few years or some years. And there's a belief, or there's, a narrative of, I don't like living in Miami because people are too superficial. That is like a general idea or concept that is being shared among people living in Miami. And this is a belief, right? At the individual level, that could have many degrees of truth. But ultimately, that is a belief that I choose to sustain or not sustain. I choose to believe that most people in Miami are superficial or not, right? Now, if I really look at this belief may be hiding something that is a little bit deeper than the thought itself, the belief itself. It may be hiding something like, I personally struggle with my own self-esteem. I personally struggle with feeling like I am not good enough. Maybe feeling like I do not belong. When I find this out, it is going to be very difficult to understand it, to acknowledge it, and to embrace it. It is always going to be easier to sustain a thought that eventually could become a belief that puts the responsibility out there, instead of me taking responsibility for what needs to be embraced and loved and taken care of internally. Because when I really inquire about that discomfort, and then I find that that belief is sustaining that discomfort, when I find personal responsibility and personal power is when I recognize, how am I taking part on this belief? How am I taking part in this discomfort? And ultimately, what this is doing is putting responsibility on my shoulders. Is putting a lot of work for me. And this is not something that all of us are willing to do, because it is hard, because it takes time, because it takes energy, because it takes effort. And most importantly, it takes a lot of compassion. It takes a lot of compassion towards ourselves to do the work, to explore, to sit with it, to inquire, to acknowledge it, to embrace it. But of course, this is not the only way that emotions, as we start to explore them, are going to shake our world. There are so many more things. They're going to show us that perhaps a lot of times when we are trying to control our life, when we're trying to make sure that everything comes out the way that we expected, we may find that we are controlling everything so much because we don't have the capacity to sit with the discomfort that an outcome that is different than what we expect is going to require. So a lot of times when we're trying to control a situation, to control a person and the way that they're responding to things, ultimately, when we really dig deeper, we can find that we are so afraid of feeling the discomfort that a possible situation, a possible frustrating situation, a possible embarrassing situation, a possible failure, a possible disappointment may arise from a situation, then we are going to want to do everything possible so that we do not feel that. And when we build our emotional resilience, when we build the capacity again to be able to sit with what it is, to sit with the emotion, the sensation, the information that emotion is bringing, we're able to flow with life in an easier way. And I briefly mentioned this in my last video when I talked about the difference of the right mode of our brain and the left mode of our brain, and how the left mode of our brain is a lot more linear and a lot more logical. And planning is another function of our left mode of the brain. So when we are controlling, when we're planning, we're not able to connect with the creative capacities that we have. And when we are not able to do that, we're not able to allow life and the expression of life, the cosmic intelligence that life carries within. Because when we look around, when we go out to nature and we see the beautiful flowers, the beautiful plants. All of that was created from this cosmic intelligence. All we need to do is make the space for that to flow through us. And when we are in constant controlling mode, when we're trying to make sure everything turns out the way that we expect it to be, so that we don't feel the emotion that that is possibly going to create for us, then we are limiting and we're blocking the flow of this cosmic intelligence that is ultimately going to bring more abundance and more beauty and more creativity into our lives. So a lot of times when we think that we want a specific goal, when we want a specific outcome, and we do everything that is possible to the point that we are blocking the actual energy of life that is going to allow that to bloom in what is supposed to bloom, we're actually sabotaging ourselves and our experience as human beings. So building emotional resilience, in my opinion, is almost like this magic tool that is going to help us unblock the flow of this cosmic intelligence and the flow of abundance in our lives. And of course, building emotional resilience is not only going to bring abundance to our lives, but that is going to have ripple effects. So our relationships, both personally and professionally, are going to be impacted by this. And the more that we unblock these things, the more that we are willing to sit with whatever the situation, this relationship, this connection is going to bring, whatever the emotion that this is going to actually create. As I build that resilience, I am more open to give myself the freedom to explore and give everyone around me the freedom to explore as well. Because if we think about it, when we are in a relationship with someone and we want them to change in a specific way, we want them to change because we find it uncomfortable to be with the way that they are. Instead, when we focus on what is really the discomfort coming from my own beliefs, from my own ideas, from my own expectations, that is going to give us a level of responsibility to gently and compassionately address that in our inner world. And as we do that, we naturally change what is happening around us. We won't have to change anything that is outside of us, because when I release the tension that I'm holding about this rigid expectation and the need for control, the energy that is going to be felt around us, that energy flow, because again, emotions are energy in motion. And when we are in a resistance type of emotion, everything around us is actually sensing that. Even though we don't understand that intellectually, everything and everyone around us can sense that. Right? It's like when we walk in a room and we sense that there is a heavy energy, or on the contrary, there's like a really joyful energy, even though no one has said anything, is because we have that capacity to sense that energy, to sense that information that flows within that energy. So when we take that responsibility, when we start to looking at ourselves with that love and with that compassion, to understand that it's okay to sit with my emotions, to understand them, to inquire about them, to feel them, and to allow them to flow, we're going to be able to release that. We're going to be able to expand. We're going to be able to really experience that freedom, and in turn, give that freedom to others to feel and express the highest expression of their human experience. So with that, I think this gives you a small understanding as to why I think building and cultivating emotional resilience is so incredibly important in our lives. And before I wrap up this video, I wanted to mention that one of the ways in which I was able, and I am able, because again, this never ends, to sit with my emotions and to get familiar with them and inquire about them, is through meditation, and specifically mindfulness meditation. And journaling is a huge part of this as well. Sitting with pen and paper and expressing exactly as things are being felt and how thoughts are coming up. I've mentioned this before. even though all of these practices are incredibly important, one of the biggest practices that I really invite you to do is to cultivate compassion towards ourselves. Because it does not matter how much we know, how much we understand at an intellectual level, if we're not alchemizing all of that knowledge with love and with compassion, things may get even more difficult. We may get even more stuck at this level, and we may actually limit our capacity to expand and to connect and to love and to live life from a more fulfilling place. I hope that you found something in this video that was helpful or hopeful. Please don't forget to like or leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And if you have any questions, if you have any suggestions for a future video, I would love to hear from you. I will see you in the next video.